Dear students, in this introductory part of this lecture video, we will talk about the waterfall model. This waterfall model is a fundamental process activity, and this process activity includes specification, development, validation, and evolution, and represents them as a separate process space, such as requirement specification, software design, implementation, testing, and so on. Waterfall model is illustrated on this slide. Here you can see waterfall model defines 5 stages of process activities. So first is requirement definition, system and software design, implementation and unit testing, integration and system testing, and the last stage is operation and maintenance. Because of the cascade, you can see one phase to the other phase. There is no model which we call it as a waterfall model. Since there's a cascade, you can see that is one phase to the other phase. This model is actually what we call it as a waterfall model or a software life cycle model. Waterfall model, that is an example of a plan driven process. That is, you must definitely plan thoroughly and you must schedule all of the process even before you start working on them, because once you sign off the activities, there is no way you can go back to it. Carefully observe once requirement definition is done. Once the requirement definition is done, that is an arrow pointing to the next phase, that is no arrow will be pointing back to the previous phase. That is, hence we call it as a waterfall model, because it just cascading the phase, that is a cascading from all, that is one phase to the other phase. That is thoroughly we planning is a very crucial whenever you apply the waterfall model for the development. So that is the principal stages of all this are 5 principal stages. First, let us discuss one by one. That is a requirement definition. That is a requirement definition or requirement analysis. Here the system services or the constraints goals are all established within the customers. That is, they are the in detail defined as this serves as a system specification, and this is the very first phase of the waterfall model. All the constraints, services, goals, which are all established in this with the customer, and also in detail will be defining all the services related to this system specification. So all this which comes under the first phase, that is a first phase of the waterfall model is requirement definition. Next phase is a system design. System design process allocation, that is a requirement either a hardware or the software system by establishing an overall system architecture. So the software design involves in the identifying and describes the fundamental software system abstraction and their relationship, and this overall, we call it as a second phase. That is a systems and software design. So either it can be the hardware or the software system. So by establishing an overall system architecture, so all this involves in identifying and also describing the fundamental software system subtraction. So all this which relationship between all this we call it as a second phase, that is a system and software design. Next, coming to the next phase, implementation. So during the stage, software design is realized as a set of programs or a program units, and the unit testing. So unit testing involves in verifying each and every units and each programs whether it meet its specification. So that is where we see a implementation and unit testing. So the next testing, which is a next phase in the waterfall model, is individual here, integration and system testing. So all the program units, that is the individual program units of programs that were developed and tested in the previous phase, so are now integrated and tested as a complete software or complete system to ensure that all the software requirements have been met after testing. So that is a software system is delivered to the customer. So here we make sure that all the program units or the programs that were developed with the previous phases are now integrated and tested with a complete system to ensure that software requirements have been met. And after the testing, once we deliver a system to the customers or with the expectations. So one last stage of the waterfall model here is normally this is a very longest life cycle phase. So system is installed here and put into the field or a practical use, and maintenance involves the current error which were not discovered in the earlier stage of the life cycle. So which were not the earlier stage with where the error is not discovered. So that is where we call it as longest life cycle. So normally that is operation and maintenance. So all this will be the waterfall model. So as the flow water flows from the readily through the from the top to the bottom, so same here. So waterfall model is also carried out from one phase after the other phase. And also if there is any one phase makes it a failure, so you need to get back to the first phase, and again you need to cascade from the first phase to the last phase. So that is where waterfall model, it is a cascading a model, and also it is unidirectional and it is carried one phase after the other phase. So here, software waterfall model here, there are some of the principal attributes of the waterfall model. So that is a sign off of each phase. So as I said, so here the result of each phase is one or more documents that are approved or signed off, and following phases do not start until the previous phase has finished and approved. So that is where first each of the phase have to be first approved, and then only it should be carried out to the next phase. That is sign off of each phase has to be carried out. That is a very first principal attribute of the waterfall model. So one practical scenario here is, so that is a reality overlap between the phases. So in practice, there is some kind of overlap information between the stages. During the design problem, requirements may be identified. During the coding, design problem may be found, and so on. So in practice, what happens? So these are the some of the overlap between the phases in reality. So again, in practice, the software process definitely not a linear models as depicted in the waterfall model, but it definitely involves in certain amount of feedback from one phase to the another, which is not facilitated in the waterfall model. So that is a software processes not linear. So some of the limitations of the waterfall model here. So we can see the costly iterations with the rework have to be involved. So as like iteration becomes costly and involves significant work, therefore after some time, so that is a some number of iterations every phase, some number of iterations or every phase. Once you sign off the phase, there is no way you can go back to the phase. So that is rework is involved. System, one more thing, like system won't do exactly what the customer wants during the final, during the final phase of the life cycle. That is the operation and maintenance. Software is put into use others and omissions, and all the original software requirements are now to be discovered. So that is where here what happens, like premature freezing of the requirement is needed. That is a freezing of all this requirement is needed, and discovery of all the errors and omission. So and there is a much needed for the new functionality, and the early commitment have to be needed before this. So all these some of the limitations of waterfall model. And also one thing where you can use the waterfall model here is, so well understood requirements, and also the requirement must be well understood before you start with the applying this waterfall model. So you should be knowing the requirement of the proper development of the software, and then only you can use the waterfall model, and change is unlikely. So it is a cascading phase, and you need to go back to the next previous phase and start from the each of the first phase. So it is a again, it is a cascading, and it is which is unlikely, changes unlikely, and it should be well understood requirement in complex projects or the complex software development. The waterfall model can't be used. So that is a one limitations wherein which, and also when you can use the waterfall model.